Good morning, everyone. My name is Jenifer Schaye, and I'm the General Counsel for the Louisiana Legislative Auditor. And it's my pleasure today to begin this session with you on setting millage rates. As you know, it will be Garrison, who's our tax review officer, who will lead you through most of the aspects of this, and then Patrick Virgadamo, who's a senior attorney, works with me, will talk about open meetings. It is our hope that this session treats you in a way that you think of yourself and us as trusted advisors, as fiduciaries with responsibility for taxing issues. As we all know, as we live in this world today, there are lots more issues for government to deal with than we have money for. So it's extremely important that you understand the millage process and that you're able to administer that process in a fair and equitable manner. Joanne works with me on a daily basis so that we can better serve you. And it is, I know, going to be a pleasant 3 or 4 hours for you to go through this. What might not be the most interesting topic in the world, but will be interesting because it will help you to do your job in the months ahead. So we thank you for joining with us in this millage workshop. In behalf of Mike Wagasback, who's a legislative auditor, we hope that we're transparent and accountable in this presentation and that the presentation helps you to be transparent and accountable. If there are issues, legal issues that arise after you hear this presentation, then you'll feel free to consult our legal assistants on the LLA webpage or to give us a call directly. Thank you, and I hope you have a wonderful day.
Good morning, everyone. It's so nice to be with you this morning. I want to thank Jenifer for coming in and giving us a few words this morning. I always appreciate her taking the time um, and speaking with us. She's very encouraging. She does take time out of her day, and like she said, she and I do work together on a daily basis, and she does provide information and she provides the support that we need in the tax review office. Daily basis, and she helps us interpret the new rules and procedures that come out through the legislature. So we always appreciate her taking her time and coming in and supporting the millage workshops. Um, you should have a copy of the Setting Millage Rates book, either electronically or you should have printed that so you can follow along with the PowerPoint and throughout the presentation. If you don't have that, take a few minutes and get that available right now as we're going through just a few brief little notes that we're going to go through before we get started through the PowerPoint. That's available on on our website. It's in that on that same screen where you went to register for the workshop today. It's the Setting Millage Rates book, and you can view it either electronically or it's available to download and print if you'd rather have that as well. Like I said, before we get started, there are just a few notes that I want to point out to you. Um, the information we're going to go over today, just keep in mind that it is set forth by state law through the state constitution and the statutes. It's not anything in here that is required by the legislative auditor's office. It's all set forth through the state law. We're just here to provide you with the information. It is up to you as the local government taxing district to know and follow these requirements. Um, we are the certifying agency. We are not the ones that actually set the law. Um, one thing you want to make note of is there are no gray area in the law. It's very specific requirements. There are no exceptions when it comes to following these requirements. So again, it's wonderful that you're here participating in this workshop so that you can gather this information and you'll know the requirements and you'll have the setting millage rates book. So that way you'll know the requirements and you understand that what they are, and you'll know the procedures that are necessary to meet those requirements. These are our interpretations of the law. Um, the AG has opined on several of these and is in agreement with our interpretation of these laws. However, we're here for informational purposes only. If you have a disagreement or if you want to challenge the interpretation, or if you want to um, have your attorney, read the law and find out um, if they have a different interpretation, that's strictly up to you. There's a lot of decisions that you should be consulting with your attorney on anyway. So I strongly advise that, you stay in contact with your attorney and have that information decided in consultation with the entities, with you, the local government's attorney. Another thing I want to point out is that last year in 2025, even though none of the requirements changed, there were several issues that came up with the roll forward procedures. So we're going to go through those in a lot of detail today. That's going to be one of the last things we go over before we end the workshop today. So if you anticipate rolling forward this year, I do encourage you to stick with us throughout the workshop. We're going to address those questions toward the end of the workshop, but if you anticipate rolling forward, we're going to try to clarify those procedures a little bit better today. I don't know what the issue was last year, why there was some confusion, but we're going to clarify those today. So stick with us throughout the whole workshop. If you need confirmation that you did participate today, you can email me and I will be the one to confirm your attendance. Give me a few days to get the confirmation, the attendance list, and then I can confirm your attendance that you did in fact participate today. One other thing that I want to point out to you is that the legislative session will be beginning March the 9th. So if you have something going through that session that affects your taxing district, I do encourage you to follow along with that session, that document, that bill. That's not something that the auditor is going to do for you. That, follow that. And if it affects an ad valorem tax, please let me know what that is. And then if it passes through, goes all the way through, makes it through the end of the session, let me know so then we can do the research and add that to the millage database. One other thing I want to point out is, I'm not sure if you're aware, our office offers, it's called the Center for Local Governments. Um, Center for Local Governments Excellence in Local Government. It's called CLGE for abbreviation. That's coming up March the 11th and 12th. That is 2 days that offer you some excellent resources, some excellent education. It has public bid, public records. Jenifer will be back talking about different things. Our senior attorneys will be there. Patrick Virgadamo will be there. Angela Heath will be there. They're pulling some other people from other areas of the office. So I do strongly encourage you to look at our website and get some more information on that CLGE, because it does provide, it's in person and in virtual settings. So look at that and it will provide you with additional information, especially if you're new to local government. I strongly encourage you to look at that as well. So with all that information, we're going to go ahead and get started with why we're here today, the Setting Millage Rates book, setting your ad valorem taxes. We're going to start on page 3 of your Setting Millage Rates book with the definitions. A lot of these definitions, most of them, they're the same as they have been in the past, and we're not going to go over all of them. We're just going to touch on a few that are most important to the millage adoption process. But all of these terms are used throughout the procedures. So you want to take it upon yourself to get familiar with these and know what they mean. The first one we're going to go over is the actual levy. It's also known as the authorized rate. It's the millage rate levied and collected in a particular year. That's the rate that you as a taxing district is going to adopt in a public meeting. You're going to adopt it by either resolution or ordinance, and then it's going to be added to the tax roll, and then ultimately it will make its way to the tax bills. So that's the rate that you are going to adopt by either resolution or ordinance in a public meeting. Then we're going to move on down to the adjusted maximum millage and the maximum authorized levy. Those two terms generally work together through reassessment. So that's why we're going to discuss them together. The adjusted maximum millage and the maximum authorized levy. Those two terms generally will work together through reassessment. The adjusted maximum millage is the maximum authorized millage as adjusted by reassessment. If the actual levy and the maximum authorized levy are different, then both rates will be adjusted through reassessment. And then you might want to highlight that very last bullet there. It says any rate up to and including the adjusted maximum millage may be levied without going through the roll forward process. So you can levy any rate up to that adjusted maximum millage without rolling forward. Now, don't get hung up right now on the term roll forward because, like I said, we are going to go through the roll forward a little bit later in the workshop. So we're going to go through those details and we're going to explain in detail what that is. But any rate up to and including the adjusted maximum can be levied without going through the roll forward. In the roll forward, the adjusted maximum millage is going to be the lower rate when there is an increase in property value. You may want to make a note of that. In reassessment, when there is an increase in property value, the adjusted maximum millage is going to be the lower rate to generate the same revenue as the prior year. The adjusted maximum millage will be the lower rate and can be levied without rolling forward. The maximum authorized levy is the rate approved by voters before that tax has even gone through reassessment. That is the highest rate. The maximum authorized levy is the millage rate before the tax has even gone through reassessment. It's the millage rate as adjusted by reassessment if there is a decrease in property value. If there is a decrease in property value, the maximum authorized levy and the adjusted maximum millage will be the same rate. If there is a decrease in property value, the two rates will be the same. The maximum authorized levy is the prior year's maximum after reassessment if there is an increase in property value. So if there is an increase in property value, the prior year's maximum is now your maximum authorized levy. And then you want to highlight that very last bullet that says the prior year's maximum, which we know is the maximum authorized levy, will only be available until the next reassessment occurs. So your maximum authorized levy will only be available until the next reassessment occurs. So 2028 will be the next reassessment. If you have not rolled forward and there was an increase at the 2024 reassessment, your current maximum authorized levy will only be available for 26 and 27. The current maximum authorized levy will only be available for 26 and 27 to roll forward. If you do not roll forward in 26 and 27, you're going to lose it at the 28 reassessment. Okay. So the maximum authorized levy is going to be the higher rate when there is an increase in property value. The adjusted maximum millage is the lower rate. The maximum authorized levy is the higher rate, and that will generate additional revenue. So turning the page to page 4. And I apologize, I have been forgetting to change the slides. Okay, here we go. So on page 4 of the definitions, the pro se verbal It's a detailed written report of the proceeding of an election. So a pro se verbal is just a report that you are required by law to create every time you have an election. Reassessment is also known as reappraisal. We have re-highlighted and underlined because you cannot have a reassessment or a reappraisal until you have the first assessment and the first appraisal. So we're going to talk more about reassessment and reappraisal a little bit more. We have a whole section on that, but just to give you the definition, reassessment is the process mandated by the state constitution to revalue all property subject to taxation. So all property that's defined by the state constitution that's subject to taxation will be revalued. Reassessment adjusts the millage rates either upward or downward based off of those property values. And the purpose of reassessment is to keep the total amount of ad valorem taxes the same as the preceding year. And the millage rates will remain the same, will remain fixed as established by law. You might want to highlight that last bullet. The state constitution says that general obligation bonds are not affected by reassessment. The last definition is the roll forward. And again, don't get fixed on that right now. We're going to go over that in detail, but just so you'll know the definition of the roll forward, it's increasing the millage rates after reassessment from the adjusted maximum millage, which is the lower rate, to a rate not in excess of the prior year's maximum, which we know now is the maximum authorized levy, which is also the higher rate. So you're rolling forward from the lower rate to the higher rate. And make a note, roll forward only occurs when there is an increase in property value. So the next section we're going to talk about are the laws that affect the ad valorem tax process. Article 7, Section 18F of the Constitution mandates all properties subject to taxation be reassessed and valued at least once every 4 years. So you want to highlight that at least once every 4 years. There are provisions that allow the assessors and the Louisiana Tax Commission to call for reassessment outside of that 4-year window. It doesn't happen very often, but there are provisions that allow for them to call for a special reassessment. I have not heard of any special reassessments occurring. So as far as we know, 2028 will be the next statewide reassessment. And then reassessment is done under the authority of the Tax Commission and the assessors. The legislative auditor has no authority over the actual process of reassessment. Article 7, Section 23B mandates the adjustment of ad valorem taxes either upward or downward based off of the values that the assessors have calculated. So what happens is the legislative auditor will take the values that the assessor and the tax commission have calculated from Article 7, Section 18F. We don't know how they do that. We don't know how they come up with those values. That's a question for the tax commission and the assessor. We will take those values and then we will adjust the millage rates. Now, if you want to know how the millage rate is adjusted, I can give you that formula, but I cannot tell you how they calculated those values. Article 7, Section 23C authorizes the increases in millage rates after reassessment, but not in excess of the prior year's maximum. So that is the roll forward. So if you get a question from a taxpayer, what gives you the authority to increase my taxes? The answer is going to be Article 7, Section 23C of the Constitution. Gives me that authority, gives my taxing district that authority to roll forward. And then Article 7, Section 23D of the Constitution states reassessment does not apply to millage rates being levied for the payment of general obligation bonds. And then moving on down to Revised Statute 47-1705A and Revised Statute 11-1481. You can see that those generally have the same language. except that 1705A excludes Orleans Parish, whereas 11-1481 does not. So Orleans Parish has to follow the same provisions as all other parishes have to follow. And what that does, it requires all tax recipient agencies of ad valorem taxes to adopt an ordinance or resolution each year with a millage rate to be applied to the assessed value. So that provides that you, as the tax recipient agency, you have to adopt an ordinance or resolution annually. Either one is fine. That's up to you and your bylaws or your charter to decide, are we going to use a resolution or are we going to use an ordinance? You should have that set forth again in your bylaws. The authorizing ordinances or resolutions are required to be furnished to the assessor and the legislative auditor no later than June 1st of each year and no later than September 1st for St. Charles Parish. So it says the assessor and the legislative auditor. We want you to submit them to the assessor. The assessor will then submit them to us. That just keeps everybody in the loop. The assessor has an electronic system that only they have access to. So even if you were to submit them to the legislative auditor, we would send them back to the assessor. So we want you to send them to the assessor and let the assessor submit them electronically. There is a deadline of June 1st for all parishes other than St. Charles, and St. Charles has a September 1st deadline. In the year of reassessment, so in 2028, there's no way that you could reach that June 1st deadline because the assessors don't even have the public service values by that time. However, this year, being that it's not a reassessment year, there's no reason why you cannot meet that June 1st deadline. You have your millage rates, so unless you're going to roll forward, unless something has happened to the values, the millage rates are not going to change. You could start your millage adoption process right now and have those adopted by June 1st and have them submitted to the assessor. So I do strongly encourage you to communicate with your assessor's office before you even start. Say, hey, has something happened? Um, have values changed? Is there anything I need to know? We're getting ready to start the millage adoption process. Tell me, is this a good time? Should we go ahead and start? And the assessor will, I'm sure they'll probably tell you, let's get this going, let's get this done, let's get it out of the way. St. Charles Parish went to the legislature a few years back because they knew that June 1st was not a good deadline in the year of reassessment, and they had the deadline moved to September 1st. So, and so far they've met that September 1st in the year of reassessment. So that was a good idea. However, their AG opinions that waived the June 1st deadline, there are no AG opinions that waive the September 1st deadline. So again, 1481 does not exclude Orleans Parish, so now they have to follow the same procedures as the rest of the state. Revised Statute 47-1705B, that's the statute that provides all the additional notice requirements for rolling forward. If you've rolled forward in the past, you know there's a lot of steps, a lot of procedures that go into that, and the 1705B is the statute that provides that. It authorizes increases in millage rates after reassessment to millage rates not exceeding the prior year's maximum and sets forth the additional notice requirements. On page 6 of your Setting Millage Rates book, Revised Statute 47-1705.1A and .1B, it currently applies only to St. Tammany Parish. What it does, it applies to any parish with a population of 245,000 to 265,000. And right now, that's only St. Tammany Parish. And so what B does, it states that it requires any non-elected taxing authority that plans to roll forward to coordinate the public hearings and public meetings with the parish governing authority. So any non-elected taxing authority within St. Tammany Parish has to coordinate their public hearings and public meetings when they're going to roll forward with the parish government of St. Tammany Parish. The parish governing authority, the parish government there will designate certain dates where the public hearings and public meetings will be held. And then they all have to coordinate that information together. Revised Statute 47 1993A applies to municipalities. Municipalities that prepare their own tax rolls and assessment lists. Upon approval of these rolls by the parish governing authorities as boards of reviewers, shall prepare and submit those rolls to the Louisiana Tax Commission and the legislative auditor, its millage rates as assessed value, the assessed valuations of property. So they have to also submit documentation. So municipalities also have to submit documentation to the legislative auditor. The next set of laws, which is revised statute 4211 through 28 through revised statute 4436. 4211 through 28 is the open meetings law, and 4436 kind of plays into the open meetings law. And so Patrick Virgadamo is going to come talk to us in a little bit about the open meetings law. So we're going to move over that and let him cover that part of the presentation. So we're going to move on to revised statute 181285, which is on page 7 of your book. What 181285 does, it mandates the notice of election be given. If that notice is relative to an election which affects ad valorem taxes, that notice of election shall state that a portion of the monies collected shall be remitted to certain state and statewide retirement systems. So now, whenever you have an election, you have to provide notice, and that notice shall include that a portion of the monies are going to their statewide retirement systems. Now, I'm sure most of you probably have a bonding attorney that handles these elections for you, and they're probably familiar with these requirements, but you as a taxing authority are responsible for these elections and these requirements, so you want to be sure that you're familiar with them as well. Revised Statute 181293 requires the governing authority ordering the election shall preserve a pro se verbal. So there you go. There's that term we learned earlier, pro se verbal. If the election affects ad valorem taxes, the governing authority shall include a copy of that notice of election and a proof of publication. So that has to be included in that report, that pro se verbal. The governing authority shall forward a copy of that pro se verbal to the Secretary of State, who shall record it. Now, let me be clear, the Legislative Auditor's Office does not have any authority over the actual election. We have no authority over the election. That is the Secretary of State's office has complete authority over that and the recordation of the pro se verbals. We included this in the book because we need that pro se verbal to be complete once we get it. After that election and after you've created that pro se verbal, we need a recorded copy to be sure we have accurate information to add that approved ad valorem tax to the millage database. So that's why these statutes are in the book. We need accurate information to be sure we're including that in the millage database. Article 6, Section 33B of the Constitution, it provides that the full faith and credit of a political subdivision is hereby pledged to the payment of a general obligation bond. So now we're getting to a general obligation bond. So what this does is the governing authority of the issuing political subdivision shall levy and collect or cause to be levied and collect on all taxable property within the political subdivision, taxes to pay principal and interest on such bonds as they mature. So you might want to highlight that as they mature. We interpret that to mean you should be levying just enough of a millage rate to pay that bond as for that 1 year. You should not be levying the same millage rate for 5, 6, 7 years. We know that property values change. They change annually, and if not annually, they're going to change every 4 years because of reassessment. So you need to be sure that you are recalculating these bonds in accordance with that repayment schedule that the bond commission gave you. So you do not want to under collect and you do not want to over collect on these bonds. We should see some kind of fluctuation in these millage rates. We should not see the same millage rate levied for 10 years in a row on these general obligation bonds. Not only is it going to cause you to over or under collect, it's going to cause you an issue with your audit. So you want to be sure that you are recalculating these general obligation bond millage rates. And then revised statute 24.513.0, it requires the legislative auditor to annually review, calculate, and certify the amount due to each public retirement system as provided by law. And these are known as the pension reports. The legislative auditor is required to submit to each sheriff and tax collector a report setting forth the certified amounts due from each tax recipient agency um, to the retirement systems. So by law, there is a portion, a percentage amount required to come off the top of each ad valorem tax to go to certain state and statewide retirement systems. Revised statute 135565 requires each sheriff or tax collector to deduct the amount that's certified by the legislative auditor and remit that amount to those retirement systems. So those reports are on our website now. And, if you wanted to go out there and look at your taxes that are and see how much is coming from your taxes, they're out there. You're free to go look at those reports and see, how that's affecting your taxes. So we went through those kind of quick. So please look at those and let me know if you have any questions. Now we're going to move on to the open meetings law. And Patrick Virgadamo is here, and we appreciate him taking time to come and talk to us about the open meetings law. So with that said, we're going to go ahead and invite Patrick to come on in and give us this information.
Morning, everyone. We're going to just going to be a brief going through the open meetings law, but it's important to understand because the way taxing bodies do their millages, update them, do reassessment, do roll forward is through their body, and their body is usually going to be subject to these laws. So if you want to follow along in your setting millage rates book, we're looking around pages 8 through 13. And the first thing we need to look at is Article 12, Section 3 of the Louisiana Constitution. It states no person shall be denied the right to observe the deliberation of public bodies and examine public documents except in cases established by law. This provision of the Constitution is essentially what gives us the basis for the open meetings law and the public records law. Basically, it gives the public a right to observe and get copies of documents so they know what their government is doing. You may have heard these collectively called the Sunshine Laws in the past. A part of this comes from an old law review article that former U.S. Supreme Court Justice Louis Brandeis once quoted as saying, "Sunshine is said to be the best of disinfectants." The idea is that when government happens out in the light of day and not in backroom smoke-filled rooms, it usually tends to be less corrupt. So for statutes, the first thing we're going to look at is 42:12. The important thing to understand from this statute is it requires that the open meetings law be construed liberally in favor of public being allowed to observe. What this means is if at the end of the day it's a 50-50 call whether it should be not public or public, the courts are directed to treat it as public, so that they're going to err on the side of things being considered public. What this means is if there's an exception for, say, executive session, because there's a presumption and a constitutional mandate for the public to have access, it's going to be strictly construed, and unless you meet all the requirements for the exception, you can't use it. So 42:13 gives us some definitions. The first thing is, what is a public body? And a public body is going to be those things you think of: your board of aldermen, your city councils, your police juries, parish councils, school boards, levy boards, port commissioners, your boards of special districts, your levy boards, your gravity drainage districts, lighting districts, rec districts. It's also going to be commissions and authorities. It's also going to include your committees and subcommittees of any of those entities. So any formal or even remotely informal subcommittees made up of members of those bodies are also going to be subject to all these rules, so that we get a lot of questions. If we have a committee meeting, do we need to take minutes? Yes. Do we have to notify people that we're having this committee meeting? Yes. Same rules apply for the committee as it does for the whole. So meetings, if you ever look at AG opinions, this is one of the biggest asked questions of besides public body is, am I a public body and is this a public meeting? The easiest way to think of a meeting is it's a gathering of a quorum of that public body, and we'll talk about what quorum is next, to either deliberate or take action on things that are within its jurisdiction, supervision, control, or advisory power. Or, and this is what gets people, because like, oh, we're not going to take any votes, we're not going to take any action, or receive information regarding a matter over which that public body has control, jurisdiction, or advisory power or supervision. The key thing here is one of the distinctions here we get questions is what happens if a majority of a town council go to Center for Local Government Excellence? That is fine because it is not them receiving information specific to their entity. Now, if they were having an in-service where someone was coming and train them on their ordinances, their home rule charter, things of those sorts, that's going to be an open meeting if you have a quorum of your public body, because those are things specifically receiving information about things within their control. The other thing is it doesn't include chance meetings or social gatherings. Louisiana, we love our fairs and festivals. If you happen to all be there at the local festival, just because you're present doesn't make it a meeting. Now, if you start discussing ordinances, discussing town business, then yes. But as I always tell people, don't be that person. Just enjoy the fair. Now, quorum is a simple majority of the body, and it's of all members of the body, including vacant positions. So, for example, if you have a 5-member board, like a board of aldermen for a town, 3 members constitute your quorum because it's a simple majority. It's more than half. Sometimes people will hear the idea of half plus one, but it's not always really half plus one because 2.5 plus one is 3.5. So the key thing is that the law can define it differently. That's just the standard definition is it's simple majority. And of course, vacant positions still count because it's a simple majority of the entire body, which includes those vacant positions, which is why it's important if you're a small town or a board, if you're starting to have vacant positions, get them filled timely because you could get to a point where you don't have enough to even have a quorum. Now, walking quorums, this is something the AG has kind of given us. It's not in the statute, and you want to avoid these at all costs. Essentially, what a walking quorum is, while you may never technically have an actual quorum ever physically present for a meeting, constructively, you have constructively created a quorum by having some people here, some people there, but discuss the whole thing. The classic example of this is a board member of a town goes and talks to board member A goes talks to board member B. Hey, I'm thinking about this ordinance. Are you on board? Here's the things. This is what I'm going to do. Board member B says sure. So board member A now goes to board member C, starts talking to them and says, hey, I talked to board member B. They're on board. Are you on board? And starts talking things. At the end of the day, you get a situation where constructively a majority of people have met outside of the public's view and basically conducted business. And so you want to avoid that. The other more modern example of this are people texting during meetings and having conversations instead of publicly saying what they want to say. The AG is cautioned against that. There's an AG opinion on that. The key thing is the Constitution gives the public the right to observe your deliberations. And so basically the AG says, unless you have something to take your cell phone texts and post them up for everyone to see, kind of like the teacher saying, share your passing note, you should not be doing it. Now, 4214 basically gives us the commandment of the open meetings law is that meetings shall be open to the public unless there are an exception. The primary exception which we have is the executive session, where there are certain matters you're allowed to close your meeting and to only the body and those necessary and close out the public. So 4214 also directs us on voting. So generally, members have to be physically present to vote unless they're operating under one of the exceptions we'll talk about. And their votes have to be cast orally or through some electronic means which shows how they voted. Generally speaking, the AG has said a showing of hands is not sufficient. And for millage purposes, it never would be, because usually with your pro se, you're going to have to say who was there and how they voted. So you need to know who and how people voted. Your minutes should also reflect that too. You can't proxy vote. So you basically have, unless a law says public official and his or her designee, if you're the person that's selected or appointed to that position, you have to be there. No one else can show up for you. No secret balloting, straw polling, or other means of circumventing public votes. And the AG, again, that AG opinion was 14-0140, where he basically has cautioned members of a public body about texting or other electronic communications during meeting about things that are actually going on. Better to say them publicly. Public participation and commenting. Generally speaking, all public bodies have to allow public commenting. Outside of school boards, a single commenting period is sufficient, but it needs to occur before everybody takes votes on stuff in the meeting. I would also caution you, if you do one towards the beginning of your meeting, if you add things to your agenda, after that point, you need to then allow public commenting on those new agenda items. School boards under 4215 have to have a public commenting for each agenda item. They're not allowed to have a single commenting period. Now, they can have one, but they also still have to have public commenting for every period. 4214E was something that was added a few years ago. Essentially, public bodies now with capabilities have to have some kind of rules, regulations, or procedures in place to allow members of the public that have disabilities recognized under the Americans with Disability Act, or if there's a caretaker of such a person, to be able to participate in meetings electronically. Or at least remotely. And what those rules can be as simple as allowing people to submit comments that'll be read into the record. So if they can't be physically present, but they want to basically say, hey, if I could go, this is what I would comment on this agenda item. You set your rules to allow them to do that, where they can submit those before the meeting. Certain size entities, which we'll talk about in a few minutes, have to broadcast their meetings. If you broadcast or you put your stuff on Zoom, that may be one of the ways you allow the public that are disabled to participate. So they can observe it from their home. They can submit comments during the meeting through the Q&A, or raise a hand to be able to recognize to speak. However you do this, it can be as simple as that. These rules are not subject for your executive sessions, and all state entities have to adopt formal rules under the Administrative Procedures Act. Now, 4217.1, this is the first exception we got back during COVID. What this says is if there is a governor declared disaster, and the key thing is you want to highlight that all day, every day, and twice on Sunday, a mayor's or a parish president's declaration of disaster doesn't mean anything for this exception. It has to be a governor declared disaster, and has to be one such that the nature of that disaster prohibits you from having a meeting under your normal rules. The classic example for this was COVID for the pandemic, but it could be also as something here in Louisiana, especially along the coast, where you have a hurricane. And because of the hurricane, you're unable to meet in person because there's no place that can hold everyone. So you have your meetings remotely while that disaster is still in effect. The key thing for that is there are specific rules you have to follow for that. I would say be familiar with them, especially if you live in the coastal part of Louisiana during hurricane season. But it's one of those things, unless those disasters are in effect, you can't use it. So you're better off not even thinking that it's an option unless it becomes necessary. Special rules for these meetings include things such as posting stuff on your website, regardless, sending out notices, additional notices to broadcast media, as well as limitations on what you can consider. I would say if you have questions about that one, look on our website on our FAQ for open meetings. We have a whole question specifically on it, which breaks down all those requirements. Now, 4217.2.1, this was the other part that was added to the disability for the public, where it allows for participation by disabled members of the body itself. This one applies to all state and local public bodies that are subject to the open meetings law, except the legislature and parish boards of election supervisors. Basically, what this says is if a member of a public body has a recognized disability recognized by the ADA that prohibits them from being physically present and voting, they have to be allowed to participate and vote via electronic means, video or teleconference. And so everyone else for this exception still has to be physically present. It only gives an exception to the specific member themselves. And unlike the public participation requirement, which has some limitation based on the capabilities of the public entity, there is no exception for lack of capability. But that's because this could be as simple as putting the person on speakerphone so that they're hearing the meeting and speaking and being recognized and voting. But that person still counts towards quorum. They still receive their per diems. And the key thing here is you should have rules in place. If you don't have any, you want to work with your legal counsel to draft some. And you may want, if you're a municipality, get with LMA, with the Police Jury Association if you're a parish, or the School Board Association for school boards, to get maybe some model policies or see what other entities are using so that you can craft something that works for you. And generally speaking, this would be adopted by ordinance if you're an entity that does ordinances, or resolution if you're just a regular board that doesn't have lawmaking authority. Now, 4219, this is the provision that gives us our notice and agenda requirements. Essentially, a public entity is required to give the public notice when they're going to have a meeting and tell them what they're going to have in the meeting. There are actually two notices that may be required by a public entity. If that public entity, such as municipalities or police juries, where they have by law a regular scheduled meeting, usually once a month, and it could be, say, the third Thursday of every month, at the beginning of the calendar year, they are mandated under the open meetings law to publish in their official journal and on their website, if they have one, the schedule of their regular meetings for that upcoming year. And so they should be addressing, hey, we know this third Thursday falls is Thanksgiving or something. That's usually the fourth Thursday. But the idea being you're looking ahead and you're setting your schedule for the year and then posting that. Then separately, which applies to every public entity, including those who have posted that notice at the beginning of the year, each individual meeting requires you to publish a notice for that individual meeting along with an agenda that basically tells the public, here's what we're going to do in this meeting. That notice for those individual meetings can be posted either in your official journal or at the meeting place that you meet. So usually it's going to be the main office of the entity, or in the cases of some towns or police juries, they may have a specific meeting hall that they meet for their meetings. That notice needs to be posted at least 24 hours before the meeting, and that 24-hour period does not include weekends and holidays. So we get a question a lot, can we meet on a holiday? Yes, there's nothing that prohibits that. However, you cannot include any part of that day as part of your 24 hours, which means while normally during the middle of a week, if you were meeting on Thursday at 6 p.m., you have starting at 6 p.m. on Wednesday to be able to post your notice. If that Thursday is a holiday, you need to go all the way back into Tuesday to get your 24 hours in. And the key thing is once that's posted and that 24-hour period hits, you can't make any further changes. Further, if your entity has a website, you have to also post that notice on your website. And then finally, that notice needs to include basic things, the date, time, and location of the meeting, what the agenda is, and if you're an entity that's required to broadcast under 4223, information on where people can find the broadcast, whether it's a Zoom meeting, Channel 4, or whatever that may be. You need to have that. Your agenda needs to have descriptive language. It should be sufficient so that the public can understand what's going to be discussed and voted on. If you're going to take action, and Joanne will talk about this when she talks about her stuff, you want to make sure you have action words that you're not just considering, you're planning to vote on it. So you're going to consider and take action on, or consider and vote on. You want people to know you're going to actually what you're going to do. You don't want to hide the ball here. Each agenda item has to be listed separately. And again, you can't make those changes within the 24 hours exclusive holidays or weekends before the meeting. If the public body needs to take up additional items once you get into your meeting, a unanimous vote of those present can vote to add something to the agenda. So that is the way you handle it. Don't go repost an agenda less than 24 hours before. Now, 4219.1 was added. What this basically is, it's an additional notice in addition to the 24-hour notice, and in addition to that regular meeting notice, so that if a public political subdivision proposes a new ad valorem property tax or sales and use tax, or to increase or renew an existing ad valorem sales and use tax, and wants to authorize the calling of the election for that purpose, they have to give an additional notice. That is at least 20 days, but no more than 60 days before the meeting. They have to publicly announce it in a meeting and then have an additional publication in their journal, as well as give notice to any council members that they may ultimately have to vote on your stuff. The key thing to know with this advance notice, that 20 to 60-day notice, if you give this notice and the meeting is canceled or postponed, you only have to give an additional 10-day notice for that new meeting. But if you have the meeting and just don't table or don't take up the action item, you start over again 20 to 60 days before you can take that item up again. So be very careful of how you proceed if you're doing one of those actions which require this advance notice. 4220 is basically once you've given notice of your meeting and you have your meeting, you have to keep minutes of your meetings. They are written minutes and they're usually a permanent record of a public entity. You never get rid of them. They usually have to be available within a reasonable time after the meeting. They're public records and they're not a verbatim transcript. We get this question all the time. Well, we need to transcribe them. It takes time. You're not transcribing. You're taking sufficient description to let people know date, time, and location of the meeting, who was there, how people voted, were there any specific motions, any other information that the public body says, hey, I want this in the minutes. Those are the things it's a summary. And the idea being, if you've ever had to go back and look at minutes to know what happened 20 years ago, think about what you wanted to see in those minutes, have those in your minutes. Now, you have to publish your minutes. Municipalities, parish governments, and school boards have to publish their minutes in their official journal in accordance with 43:143. And this has to happen within 20 days of the meeting under 43:144. There are actually criminal penalties if you fail to give your official journal your minutes timely. Other political subdivisions, so those that are not municipalities, parish governing authorities, or school boards, so things such as your lighting districts, your rec districts, they are still mandated to publish their minutes under 43:171, but there is no specific deadline. It just needs to be within a reasonable time. What we always tell people, if you can do it within the 20 days that a city, parish, or school board is required to do, it's going to be hard to argue that that's not reasonable. And of course, if the public body, regardless of what type it is, has a website, it has to post those minutes within 10 days from publishing it in their official journal. And those have to stay up for at least 3 months. So you should have 3 months of minutes still on your website. Lots of entities will leave them as long as they can on their website, because if they're available publicly, you tend to get less requests for them for public records. Now, one of the requirements for entities is that 4223 basically mandates that historically has said the public has a right to record meetings. So it's a right of the public and the press to record by video, tape recording, whatever. You can't argue, well, you can't record. No, they have a right to record. Now, what a public entity can do is establish criteria. You can tell them, hey, if you want to record your iPhone, that's fine, but you can't stand up in front of everybody and block the view. we have a nice little roped off area to the side. And you'll notice that a lot of press conferences or public entities will have places for the press to put recorders or set up equipment so that it's able to record everything, but it's not going to block or interrupt the meeting. Now, as of 2024 regular session, Act 539 amended to provide under 42:23B2 parish governing authorities, including their committees in parishes that have 25,000 or more, school boards of those same size parishes, including their committees, and municipal governing authorities, including their committees for municipalities of 10,000 or more population, are mandated now to live broadcast their meetings. That could be as simple as working with the local news station to broadcasting on channel or LPB, your local LPB, or it could be as simple as doing a Zoom or Facebook live stream meeting. The key thing is you have to have those, and your notices have to have sufficient notice to let the public know how to observe or go watch that live broadcast. Now, non-elected boards that have taxing authority, so like a rec district board that maybe has taxing authority, or a library board where it's all appointed members of the board, they are mandated to video, audio record, film, or broadcast all of their meetings. There is an exception that was put into place so that all of your neighborhood improvement districts, your crime prevention districts, and security districts under 33:9099.2, they are exempt from having to do this. They're still subject to all the open meetings. They're not mandated to record it. These recordings, this is where that provision where Joanne was saying 44:36F. Normally, public records have to be kept at least 3 years unless something says otherwise. For these recordings, for these non-elected boards that have taxing authority, the general rule is you have to keep it 2 years under 44:36F. And then the final thing to understand is violation of the open meeting law can make any actions taken in violation of it legally avoidable if action is taken within 60 days of the action. This is essentially, if you don't take action in 60 days, it becomes final. And then civil penalties, however, can be brought up to $500 per violation for willful violations as personal liability. So if you're intentionally kicking the public out of a meeting and you know you're not supposed to, you can get a $500 fine that you have to pay out of your own pocket per violation. So depending on how they do the violations, it could be per every person that you violated their rights. So be careful. I would say if you need additional information on open meetings, we have a lot of information out there. The upcoming Center for Local Government Excellence, Angela Heath, actually going to have a presentation on open meetings. So I would say check that out. And if you ever have questions, please feel free to give us a call. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Joanne.
All right. Thank you, Patrick. Patrick's always very helpful with these presentations. I always appreciate him coming and helping us out with the presentations. If you have any open meetings questions or any other questions, you can still put them in the box and we'll try to get those answered for you. But if not, you can always email those to the office. Legal Assistance has a great email box through our website. You can send those to, and we'll get those to one of the senior attorneys. And so, again, we appreciate our legal staff helping out tax review all the time. So thank you to all of those that in legal. Now we're going to move on to reassessment. And then we're going to go over a couple more things and then we will take a short break. So reassessment, I told you before, we're going to go over reassessment and just real quick, just so you'll get the idea of how that works and how the calculations are used, how the property values are used to calculate the millage rates and how those work and are sent back to you. So as we talked about before, when we went through the laws, Article 7, Section 18F of the Constitution is the law that mandates reassessment. It requires all properties subject to taxation to be reappraised and revalued at least once every 4 years. Again, like we said before, That is what the assessors and the Louisiana Tax Commission does. They revalue and calculate those values at least once every 4 years. Article 7, Section 23B mandates the adjustment of the ad valorem taxes. So it mandates the adjustment of the millage rates, either upward or downward, based off of the values that the assessors and the tax commission calculate. What will happen is the legislative auditor will get those values from the assessor, and we will do the calculations to adjust the millage rates. Again, we don't know how those values are calculated. There's a formula that they use. There is percentages in the Constitution that they have to use public service values. They have to do real property. They have to do personal property. But again, all that is under their authority. I don't know all the different classifications. If you have any questions on the actual values, you would need to contact either the assessor or the tax commission. Then going on down to the reassessment results, there's either going to be a decrease in property values or there's going to be an increase in property values. Occasionally, the values do stay the same. That doesn't happen very often, but it has happened. And when that happens, the millage rates will stay the same. Property affected by reassessment. Again, like I said before, all property is subject to reassessment except for general obligation bonds are not subject to reassessment, and then new or renewed millages for that reassessment year are not subject to reassessment. So if you have a tax that's going on the tax roll for the first time in 2028, if you had an election and the beginning term year is 2028, it will not be subject to that reassessment. One thing I want to point out, and you'll see in your millage rates book, we have the term renewal in brackets in quotes. Technically there is no such thing as a renewal. The AG has opined that the renewal, the tax has actually expired. That term of that tax has expired. And what you're doing whenever you go back to the voters, you're asking the voters to reenact a tax that has expired. So, which is fine. I'm not telling you to change the language. Continue doing what you're doing. Your bonding attorneys are aware of all of this, but I just wanted to make you aware that a renewal or a reenacted tax is going to be treated as a new tax through reassessment. What happened before that renewal or that reenactment is gone. The history of that tax is gone. It's going to be treated as a brand new tax and it's going to start completely over. So just be aware of that. The history is irrelevant of what has happened once that tax has gone back before the voters for a reenactment. So it's going to be treated as a new tax. New property going on the tax rolls for the first time will not be included in the taxable property value. Or again, remember that you have to assess it first before you can reassess it. So it has to be appraised first before it can be reappraised. And then keep in mind, you might want to highlight that at the very bottom. Each millage rate is adjusted and should be levied individually. For some reason, in 2025, we had taxing districts who had multiple millage rates, but they wanted to combine them, wanted to add them all together and put one combined millage rate on their resolution. That happened to 2 or 3 taxing districts in the state. They added all their millage rates together and combined them on one rate on their resolution. And that can't be done because each individual millage rate is separate. They each have a separate purpose. They're voter approved separately, so they have to be levied separately. So the next thing we're going over, the next slide, I'm not sure if it's in your setting millage rates book or not, but this is a slide, a screenshot from the actual millage database. And this is what the assessors submit to us when reassessment occurs. So each assessor has a secured site for their particular parish. They have their own individual confidential login credentials that they can log into their secured site. And this is a reassessment form. At the top of the page, you'll see it says current millage rates. Now, this was from the 23-24 reassessment year. So the current millage rates were for the 2023 millage levied. They levied 3.18 mills in 2023. Now, this was for an increase in property value. Then you see reassessment values. And taxable property valuation in 2023 was 182,768,000. And so then the assessor and the tax commission, they calculated a 2024 tax rolls as adjusted by reappraisal reassessment value of 190,640,000. So that is a substantial increase of $7.8 million. So that's an increase in property value. So the assessor logged into their secured site and they entered both of those values. So once those values are entered, we will take those values and we'll do a calculation using the 2023 millage rate, the value to calculate the 2024 millage rates. So since there was an increase in property value, the millage rate dropped to a rate to generate the same revenue of 3.05. So this tax, to get the same revenue, you can see that middle block says adjusted maximum millage rate. And as we talked about before in the definitions, they can levy any rate up to the adjusted maximum millage of 3.05 just to get the same revenue as the prior year. Or they have the option to roll forward back up to the prior year's maximum, which is the maximum authorized levy. It's the higher rate now of 3.18 mills. So they can either levy 3.05 without rolling forward, or they can roll forward to 3.18 mills. The next slide is a decrease in property value. It's the same formula to calculate it. In 2023, they levied 4.54 mills. The assessor entered the values for 23 and 24. You can see there was a decrease of 41,351,000. So we took those values and did the same calculation. And to get the same revenue, the millage rate went higher because there was a decrease in property value. So to get the same revenue, for this tax, the district would have to levy 4.75 mills. And you can see the column, it's adjusted maximum millage of 4.75 mills. And the third box is blank because rolling forward is not an option. All they can do is get the same revenue as the prior year. So that's reassessment in a nutshell. So I wanted to go over that before we took a quick break. Let's take a 15-minute break here. So it's 10:08. So let's be back in 15 minutes. So at, let's say, 10:25, let's be back. And then we're going to start on the actual millage adoption. All right. So thank you. And we'll see you in 15 minutes. Okay, we're back. We are back. Okay, here we go. So yeah, thank y'all for sticking with us. I'm hoping that you're getting some valuable information out of the workshop today. Before I forget, I do want to thank, a lot of people have gone in to help me get the virtual workshop together. It's a lot of behind the scenes people. So I do want to thank those people that have helped me put these workshops together. It's not just Jenifer and Patrick, it's a lot of IT people and professional development. So I do want to thank those people as well. Now we're going to get into the nuts and bolts, as I guess they say. Of actually adopting the millage rates. So the first thing we're going to talk about are the notice requirements when not rolling forward. So this is the easiest section we're going to go over today, I think, is when you're not rolling forward. So this is when you're going to levy a millage rate whenever to get the same revenue. You're going to use this section whenever if you rolled forward last year, you only have to roll forward 1 year within a reassessment cycle. So if you rolled forward last year and it was approved and certified, then you're going to follow this section this year. If you have a new tax or a renewed tax that's starting in 2026, you're going to follow this section. If you have just a bond, you're going to follow this section. If your property values decreased, and you're going to follow this section. If you want to levy the same rate that you levied last year, you're going to follow this section. You're going to follow the not rolling forward section. Anything you want to levy other than rolling forward, you're going to follow this section. And the only law you have to follow is the open meetings law. That's it. That's all you got to do is follow the open meetings law. Now, with that said, be sure you're following the open meetings law because, as you know, the open meetings law gets kind of tricky in itself sometimes. You have to provide written notice no less than 24 hours before the public meeting. Now, Patrick went through the open meetings law in, a little bit of a detail before our break. So we're not going to spend a lot of time on the open meetings law, but I do want to um, cover, go over some things that is pretty important whenever you're posting your notice. Remember that you have to post your notice no less than 24 hours before your public meeting. Now that excludes weekends and legal holidays. So, you can't post your meeting at 6 o'clock on Friday afternoon for a 8 o'clock Monday morning meeting. So just be careful with that weekends and legal holidays thing. Um, Remember that the open meetings law requires a public comment period prior to the vote. You have to do that. Um, just be careful with that open meetings law. So we're on page 16 of your Setting Millage Rates book. So if you look down, it says notice requirements for your public meeting. Again, written public notice no less than 24 hours before your public meeting. Your written public notice shall include the full and complete meeting agenda. So you have to submit to us your full and complete meeting agenda. If you're a school board or a police jury, we know you're going to take up more than just adopting your millage rates in a public meeting. We want you to submit your full meeting agenda. Your agenda shall not be changed less than 24 hours prior to the public meeting. All this is within the open meetings law. Each item on the agenda shall be listed separately and was reasonably described. The date, time, and place of your public meeting must be included on that agenda, on that notice of public meeting. On page 17, your notice of public meeting. Now, this is something that you as the taxing district will have to decide whether to post it or whether to publish it, your notice of public meeting. Again, we're still within that no less than 24 hours public meeting notice of posting it. Now, most taxing districts choose to post it because they have more control over meeting that timeline. Keep in mind, if you choose to publish it, which is allowed by the open meetings law, you still have to meet that publication deadline of the official journal. And now you also have to meet the no less than 24 hours requirement. So that's two deadlines you have to meet: the publication deadline of the official journal and the no less than 24 hours deadline of the open meetings law. So people do that, and it's fine because that's allowed by the open meetings law, but just be careful if you are a taxing district that publishes it in the official journal. In addition to posting or publishing your notice of public meeting, you're required to put it on your website if you have one. So you're required to put your notice of public meeting on your website if you have one, in addition to posting it or publishing it. So, some people ask, well, we have one, it's just dormant, or we haven't used it in years. Well, the the general counsel here has opined that you still have one. So you need to make sure that somebody there knows how to use it. If the public can view it, you still have a website. So you need to be sure someone in your office knows how to put your notices on that website. Additional agenda requirements that's going to take place during the actual public meeting. The presiding officer is required to read aloud the description of that agenda item. The public comment must be allowed prior to vote on that action. And then the public body may adopt reasonable rules and restrictions for those public comment period. The legislative auditor, we don't know your reasonable rules and restrictions. That's up to you as the taxing district to develop those. I don't know that it's necessarily required, but as a best practice, I would suggest that you adopt those by resolution or ordinance, just so that you will have those in your charter or in your bylaws somewhere, so that if anyone were to challenge those, you would have those documented, that these are our rules and restrictions. That's allowed by state law. General notice requirements for any public meeting where your ad valorem tax is going to be adopted. Be sure that your agenda is clear so that the public knows exactly what's happening in that public meeting. Be sure that you're using action verbs to adopt your millage rates. You want to adopt the millage rate, levy the millage rate, fix the millage rate. If your charter or your bylaws require that you use that term consider, you want to follow up with action. Consider and adopt, or consider and levy, or discuss and adopt. You always want to follow up with some kind of action, because the open meetings law requires specific description items. You can even have two different agenda items. One can be consider, the next one can be adopt. But we must see some type of action taken on that millage adoption. The rest of those bullets there, I feel like you can read over that. One thing I do want to point out is we don't require that you use letterhead documentation, but if you do already have it, again, don't go out and purchase letterhead stationery. But if you do already have it, use it when you're posting these notices on these agendas. It just provides more clarity for anyone reading that agenda. It looks more professional. So again, don't go out and buy it. But if you have letterhead stationery, go ahead and use that whenever you're making these notices and posting them for the public to see it. And so that's really it when it comes to the notices. You have to have that notice of public meeting. You have to post it or publish it, and you have to put it on your website if you have one. The documents required when you're not rolling forward. Like we said earlier, we want these documents submitted to the assessor, who will then electronically submit them to the legislative auditor. The assessor is the only one that has access to this documentation, to these secured site. So they would be the only ones that are able to submit the documents. When you're not rolling forward, you're going to submit the notice of public meeting, which we talked about, include your full meeting agenda. You're going to submit one ordinance or resolution. That's up to your taxing district whether to use an ordinance or resolution. If you use an ordinance, just be sure it includes that complete vote count. That includes the yays, nays, absent, and abstained. You're going to include the affidavit, and you're going to include a notary data sheet. We're on page 18 of your setting millage rates book, and you'll see where it says certification. Just keep in mind, right now, there should be no certification because there is no government declared natural disaster where you could be holding virtual meetings. So right now, there should be no certification. The requirements for your resolution or ordinance, right? There's just one when you're not rolling forward. It requires a simple majority vote of the members that are present. Remember, like Patrick said, you have to have a quorum to even hold the public meeting, and it requires a simple majority vote of the members that are present. It must be signed by an authorized person. The legislative auditor's office does not know who your authorized signers are. That's up for you as a taxing district to know that and to have that documented somewhere. We've gotten phone calls asking who are our authorized signers. We don't know. We've gotten phone calls saying our authorized signers are out of date. Well, that's something that's daily business that you need to keep up with as, people retire or people are elected and bring in their own staff. Well, that should be the first thing that's changed is the authorized signers need to be updated and documented somewhere within your office. So be sure that you as a taxing district are keeping up with who are the authorized signers. The resolution or ordinance must show the adoption date, and that adoption date must correspond with the notice of public meetings with your agenda. Your resolution or ordinance must reflect that complete vote count, yays, nays, absent, and abstained. And even if it's a unanimous vote under yays, we still want you to mark zeros under nays, absent, and abstain, because we don't know how many members sit on your board. So that way, if something is recorded by every voting option, we know that every vote has been recorded and accounted for. So we need it to be a complete vote count, even if some options have zero or the word none wrote beside it. Every resolution or ordinance must adopt a specific millage rate. And again, don't combine your millage rates, list them separately. You can list them on one resolution or ordinance, or you can submit a separate resolution or ordinance for each millage rate. It's however you want to do them, either list them or submit separate resolutions, but do not combine them into just one millage rate. The requirements for the affidavit. The affidavit is a sworn statement required by the legislative auditor just to assure us that all of the requirements of the open meetings law have been met. The affiant is attesting to that. The blanks on that affidavit should correspond with the blanks on that notice of public meeting. And then the name of the affiant must be set forth in the affidavit. So just be sure if you're the affiant, you're reading that affidavit and that you know what you're signing. A lot of times we get that and the affiant hasn't even signed it. It's notarized, but the affiant hasn't even signed it. So just be careful. If you are the affiant, if someone is attaching your name to a document, you want to be sure that you're reading it and that there's no question about the information in that document. So that affidavit has to be, it does have to be notarized. The notary should not even sign it until the affiant has signed it and is in their presence. The notary, by state law, revised statute 3512, is required to type, stamp, print their name as commissioned with the Secretary of State's office. Still, we're getting affidavits that their name does not correspond with the name with the Secretary of State's office for whatever reason. So you need to check that with the Secretary of State's office. on their notary data sheet. And it tells you there on page 19 how to go to the Secretary of State's office and check their commission, check how they're commissioned with the Secretary of State, and check their status. You want to be sure that your notary has an active status with the Secretary of State, because if any other status, we will send that affidavit back and make you redo it. This next slide, I don't think it's in your book, but this is just some issues that we had with not rolling forward last year. So remember, the open meetings law requires specific agenda items. Using consider and adopt would be more specific and a better practice and would provide that transparency that the open meetings law requires. You can see under item 4B, this taxing district just used the word consider approval for the 2025 millage resolution. Well, consider just implies we're just going to think about it. We're just going to discuss it. So consider and adopt would provide more transparency and would provide clarity and action. Like, we're going to take action on this millage resolution today. Like, we're going to do it today. We're going to take the action today. So this is a sample document that's available on our website. You're not required to use this, but it does provide the necessary information. It does meet the requirements of the law. So again, you're not required to use it, but it is available if you choose to. At the top, it provides the date for the posting, the evidence that you met the 24 hours. It provides the date, time, and place of the public hearing. It provides the agenda, and under new business, number 1, adopt the millage rate. It's out on our website in Word form and in PDF, so you could, go out there and adjust it and tweak it to meet your needs of your office. So this is an example of a taxing district last year that did not roll forward. So this is Union Parish Hospital District number 1, wards 3, 4, and 10. So what they did, they actually rolled forward in 2024. So they did not have to roll forward again in 25, and they won't have to roll forward again until after the 28 reassessment, because 28 is going to adjust their millage rates again. So if you look where I have the red aerodrome for 2025 under the authorized rate column, the authorized rate column is what they levied in 2025. They levied 5.47 mills. And they have a second millage rate under the authorized rate column. They adopted by resolution 5.11 mills. This is their notice of public meeting. At the top, you can see they gave notice on July the 30th at 2:30 for a public meeting held on July 31st at 6 p.m. at the place of Reeves Memorial Medical Center conference room. Item 3 was their public comment. Item 10 just simply says adopt millage rates. Here is their resolution, where they listed both of their taxes, 5.47, 5.11. They included a complete vote count. They included the names of the people on their board. You can include names or numbers, just as long as it's clear where the majority is. Nays, they put the word none. Abstain, they include the word none. We could tell that every vote had been, voting option had been accounted for. And then they had an authorized signer sign it. Here is their affidavit that they obtained off of our website. They had the CEO sign it in the presence of the notary. Sharon Payne is the notary, affixed her ID, her notary ID. And here is the notary data sheet. And you can see in the middle of the page where the red arrow is, and her status is active. And so the assessor submitted these documents through the secured site. We reviewed them, and then this is what the assessor gets back through the secured site. The check mark means we reviewed these documents individually. They have to submit them as a PDF. Each document has to be submitted individually. And then you can see where it says package accepted. So everything about these districts for the hospital district were accepted. We sent it back and the assessor got this message that said the package was accepted. And so we can move on to the next taxing district. So that is the non-roll forward in a nutshell. Like I said, that's the easiest thing we can do all day right there. So next we're going to talk about not rolling forward. Now, I don't want you to get intimidated by rolling forward, but it is a very meticulous little thing, that little step-by-step process that you really have to pay close attention to. You can't take your mind off of the next step. Um, you know, just because you finish one step doesn't mean you're done. You've got to always be thinking about the next step to be done. So we're going to go through it step by step. And I hope we've set up the book and we've clarified some things in the book so that going forward, it'll take away some of the confusion related to rolling forward. We're on page 20. Notice requirements when rolling forward. State law does not provide any exceptions when you're rolling forward. So you really must be careful. Now, I want to start out by saying, and I don't want to scare you, because even if we can't certify the increase roll forward, you'll always go back to the adjusted rate. So it doesn't mean you won't get any revenue. A few years ago, there was a roll forward that we could not certify for one reason or the other. And the poor lady, she just broke down in tears thinking that her taxing district wasn't going to get any revenue at all from that millage. And that's not what that means. It just means that they weren't going to get the additional revenue. You would always go back to the prior year's revenue. So, don't let it overwhelm you. Just be conscious and think about it. Just like I said, take it step by step and just don't let it overwhelm you. Just be considerate and be thinking about the next step. So when you roll forward only occurs when there is an increase in property value. And you want to go from the adjusted millage rate, which is the lower rate, and you want to roll up to the prior year's rate, the higher rate. Okay, so you don't necessarily have to roll all the way up. Most taxing districts do roll all the way up. But you want to roll up forward to gain additional revenue. Now, keep in mind, when you roll forward, you are increasing taxes, but the state constitution allows you to do that. Okay. When you roll forward, a public hearing is required and a public meeting is required. So again, we're on page 20, and you might want to highlight that second line or the second little paragraph. A public hearing is required when rolling forward, and a public meeting is required. And you cannot mix up the requirements for the public hearing and a public meeting. Article 7, Section 23C of the Constitution requires 2 separate publications no less than 30 days before the public hearing. You might want to highlight that. 2 separate publications no less than 30 days before the public hearing. More than 30 days is much better. We have taxing districts that run their ads 60 days in advance. It's for your public hearing. Publications shall include, but are not limited to, the date, time, place, and subject matter of your public hearing. Publications shall, and we know shall means must, be published on 2 separate days in your official journal and, highlight and, in another newspaper with a larger circulation within the taxing authority if there is one. So that's very important. You as the taxing district has to check circulation numbers if there is a newspaper in question that may have a larger circulation than your official journal. For example, I live in Livingston Parish. Most of the taxing districts within Livingston Parish use the Livingston Parish News as their official journal. However, the Advocate, which is the Baton Rouge paper, has a larger circulation. All of the taxing districts in Livingston Parish must contact the Advocate to be sure they have a larger circulation within their jurisdiction. That's up to the taxing district to do that. It's not the legislative auditor's responsibility. It's not the assessor's responsibility. It is the taxing district's responsibility to check that circulation. And there are red flags if it's not done. If it's a parish-wide taxing district and everybody else is publishing in 2 papers and your district is not, that's going to cause us a red flag. So you want to be sure that if there's a paper in question within your area that may have a larger circulation than your official journal, you're checking that circulation. Revised Statute 47-1705B. Public hearings will be held in accordance with the Open Meetings Law. You need to highlight that, because we know the Open Meetings Law requires a posted or published full agenda. So just like you have to post or publish your public meeting agenda no less than 24 hours before the public meeting, now you also have to post or publish your full public hearing agenda no less than 24 hours before your public hearing. In addition to that, additional notices for increasing millage rates without further voter approval will apply except for Rapides Parish. No one knows why Rapides Parish, their legislator, I guess, was just in the right place at the right time and caught on what was about to happen and had them excluded. Publications, the publications required by Article 7, Section 23C shall contain the following statement. So shall means must. The tax recipient body intends to consider levying additional or increased millage rates without further voter approval. So that statement, without further voter approval, causes a lot of questions, but you are required to put it in there, without further voter approval. 47-1705B also requires that publications shall be published on 2 separate days in the official journal and in another newspaper with a larger circulation if there is one. So the Constitution requires it and the statute requires it. The second publication in the official journal and in the newspaper with a larger circulation within the taxing district has to have at least 30 days from the second publication to the hearing date. So from your very last publication to the public hearing, there has to be no less than 30 days. So from your last publication to your public hearing, there has to be no less than 30 days. Again, 60 days or 90 days is much better. More than 30 days is better. No less than 30 days is required. 28 days is not 30 days. Just keep that in mind. There are no exceptions. 1705B goes on to say that placement in a prominent section of the newspaper is required. What's prominent is up to you. It could be in the main news section. It could be in the sports. It could be in the engagements. However, it cannot be, and you need to highlight the word cannot. Cannot be in the classified advertisements or the public notice section of the newspaper. It must be formatted in a box with a bolded outline. It must be a size of not less than 2 inches by 4 inches. It must be printed in a bold-faced type. and publication charges by the official journal shall not be in excess of regular commercial advertising. The legislative auditor's office does not know what are regular commercial advertising costs. That's between you and the newspaper to work that out, to work out what the cost of these ads are going to be. And then the bottom bullet says failure to timely publish renders the millage null and void of no effect. So again, that doesn't mean you're not going to get any revenue. It just means you're not going to get the increased revenue if you don't meet those publication requirements. One thing I want to point out that we have had issues with is your public hearing and your public meeting location must be consistent throughout the process. We've seen where the public hearing is advertised in one location. And then when it comes time for you actually to post your agenda, the public hearing has been moved to a different location. Well, that is in a violation of the open meetings law because you're not being transparent. It's confusing. So you must be consistent where with your locations. Don't move your location from one location, from one place to the other. So on page 21 is an example of the publication. Now this is our example, the legislative auditor's example. It's, we've had that in the book for a while now. You can go out and develop your own publication, but this one does meet the requirements of the law. Most taxing districts use this example. If you decide to go out and develop your own, just be sure that you're including all of their requirements. Because just as sure as you don't, someone's going to catch it, and we're going to catch it, and we're going to find out. So you need to be sure that you're including all of their requirements. Then going on, the tax recipient body shall provide the assessor in the parish the date, time, and place of the pending public hearing. So in addition to the 2x4 advertisements, you're required to notify the assessor. Several times the assessor has told me they have not been notified until they get the documentation. You want to be sure you're notifying the assessor. The assessor is required to maintain a list of the pending public hearings, and then the assessor can choose whether or not to publish that list on their website. In addition to those 2x4 publications, now this is very important. This is where the confusion has come in. In addition to the 2x4 publications, the tax recipient body shall also issue a press release. The 2x4 publication is not the press release. It's two different sites in the law. In addition, a press release must be issued to newspapers with substantial distribution within your jurisdiction and to area broadcast media. So now you have to issue press release to newspapers within your jurisdiction and to area broadcast media. You have broadcast media in your area. Just because their offices are not located in your area, they still are broadcasting in your area. They still are broadcasting. So you have to issue that press release to somebody that broadcasts in your area. Whether they air it or not, that's on them. But you, as the tax recipient agency, have to send the press release. And keep in mind, this is in addition to the 2x4 advertisement. Now, the law doesn't provide any clarity on this press release, so there's no sample document of the press release. Just you have to do it. There's no timeline for the press release. Other tax recipient agencies have told me they generally do it 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks before the public hearing, but it must be done. Going back to the 2x4 advertisements now, on the first day of publication occurring no less than 30 days before the public hearing, You must also post that 2x4 advertisement on your website if you have one. The internet posting, you have to keep it out there until action has been taken on your roll forward. The publications to consider the roll forward without action or vote with further voter approval. Now they must contain an estimate of the amount of tax revenues to be collected in the tax year from the increased amount as compared to the amount of tax revenue for the current year and the amount of increase in taxes attributable to the millage increase. So now you're going to have two different amounts in your 2x4 ad. So the first amount is going to be the total amount of revenue you're going to get by rolling forward. You're going to do the calculations. You're going to get the values from the assessor. You're going to take the millage rate, the increased millage rate, the maximum authorized millage rate, and you're going to multiply that, and that's going to be the total amount that you're going to receive. And then for the second amount, the amount attributable to the roll forward. So the difference of what you would receive if you do not receive as compared to what you as to what you would receive if you do roll forward. So the first amount would be the total amount you're going to receive. The second amount is be the amount attributable to the roll forward. So again, you're going to have a 2x4 advertisement, and separately you're going to have a press release. For purposes of the internet publication, the notice shall contain a recitation of the current year budget. So now you also must include your budget on your website. The law does not provide a definition of what they consider is a recitation. That's up to you to put that out there. Some people put a link to their full budget. Other people put what they're required to publish in the newspaper. Some people put a line item budget. That's up to you to put that out there, but just be sure that you're putting some information about your budget on your website if you're going to roll forward. On the next page, page 22, it goes into revised statute 47-1705.1, which, like we said earlier, applies to St. Tammany Parish. And again, that just requires any non-elected board within St. Tammany Parish to coordinate their public hearings and public meetings when they're rolling forward with the parish government over there. Revised statute 47-1705B2F applies to any subsequent public hearings and public meetings when you're rolling forward. Let me start out by saying, if you anticipate having to postpone or cancel and schedule a subsequent public hearing or public meeting when you roll forward, please reach out to me before you do that. This has gone to court before, and the 19th JDC and the Court of Appeals has ruled that the roll forward is all one proposal from the very first advertisement through the last adoption, from the last vote. And so it's very important that you get this right. So on page 22 of the book, under subsequent meeting, if the public hearing to consider levying additional increased millage is canceled or postponed, or if the proposal was considered at the public hearing without action or vote, you want to highlight that. You cannot allow any action or vote on the lower rate or the higher rate. Whenever you roll forward, there are two votes required, one on the lower rate and one on the higher rate. You cannot allow any action or vote. Then any future hearing to consider such proposal shall be advertised and publicized, except you do not have to do the 2x4 advertisements again. So if you anticipate a subsequent public hearing or public meeting, you have to do everything else except for the 2x4 advertisements. You still have to notify the assessor. You have to issue the press releases to the newspapers and the broadcast media. But you do not have to do the 2x4 advertisements. Again, reach out to me if you anticipate a subsequent public hearing and public meeting. So all of that pertains just to your public hearing. So once you get closer to your actual date of your public hearing and public meeting, you still have to meet the open meetings law. Okay, so we'll get into that a little bit. I feel like Patrick went through that a good bit, but just keep in mind, you still have to give notice of that public hearing in accordance to the open meetings law. So you're going to give written notice of your public hearing no less than 24 hours, excluding weekends and legal holidays. You're going to give written notice of your public meeting, excluding weekends and legal holidays. And then again, on the bottom of page 22, I feel like Patrick went through all of that, so there's no need for us to go through all of that again. On page 23, your notice requirements for your public hearing. Again, the same as we've already gone through. Written public notice, twice in the official journal, twice in a newspaper with larger circulation. All of this we've already gone through. Notice of public hearing, notice of public meeting. Just remember, you have to do all your public hearing advertisement, the 2x4 ads, the press releases, and then you also have to post or publish your public hearing agenda. The notice requirements for your public meeting are the same as we've gone over before. On page 24 are the general notice requirements that we've talked about. We talked about the action verbs and the millage adoption. Your millage adoption must always take place in a public meeting. Your millage adoption must always take place in a public meeting. So that talks about the notice requirements. Now we're going to talk about the documents, and we're going to tell you how to fill out your documentation. Okay, so these are the documents you're going to submit. Remember, you have to have a public hearing and a public meeting. Some of the documents will be pertaining to your public hearing, some will pertain to your public meeting. So we're on the documents required when rolling forward. The applicable laws are Article 7, Section 23C of the state constitution. It requires 2/3 vote of the total membership of the taxing authority without further voter approval. It's the total membership. Vacant seats count for total membership. The total membership. Revised Statute 47-1705B1A, 2/3 vote of the total membership. Again, it's the total membership. Vacant seats count in total membership. Revised Statute 47-1705B2A requires an ordinance or resolution which sets forth and designates the adjusted millage rate. So you're going to have one resolution or ordinance which sets forth the adjusted millage rate, which is that lower rate. And Revised Statute 47-1705B2B requires another resolution or ordinance which shall set forth not only the increased rate, but it's also going to set forth the adjusted rate. So that second ordinance or resolution is going to have the lower rate and the higher rate. So these are the documents you're going to submit to the assessor, who will then submit them to our office. You're going to submit the notice of public hearing, which will have the full hearing agenda. You're going to submit the notice of public meeting, which will include the full meeting agenda. You're going to submit 2 notices, 2 ordinances or resolutions, an affidavit, and a notary data sheet. Let's see, here's a question. Let me go through this question real quick. Can you have a public hearing at a meeting in which the actual vote and passage does not take place? If there is a first reading meeting where no action is taken and a second reading in which the vote takes place to levy the tax, can you hold a public hearing? Would that require additional advertising because no action? So, okay, so what I think you're talking about, and I may have this wrong. So your first reading would be the introduction. The introduction is not required the um, by the Constitution or the statute. That's required by your charter or your bylaws, or it may even be the Larson Act, but it's not required in this provision. So if you're talking about the introduction of your ordinance, that's not what we're talking about here, and that's in a whole different public meeting. But if you're talking about your your roll forward vote count, no, you cannot. No, you cannot have your roll forward vote count in one meeting and then come back to a second meeting and vote. You cannot, it all has to take place in one public meeting. Your public hearing is to hear comments from the public, and then you have a public meeting to take the action. So no, it all has to be one, like I said, the court ruled that the actual roll forward is one proposal from the very first 2x4 publication that advertises a specific public hearing date. And a specific public meeting date will be advertised on your notice of public meeting. All of that has to take place within that public meeting. So no, you can't have two different votes. You have to have one vote in one meeting. You have two votes in one public meeting. So I hope that's clear. You're going to have two votes in one public meeting. And I have examples that we're going to show you a roll forward that did it exactly right. So I hope that answered your question. If not, my email address is in the back of your book and my phone number. So reach out to me separately so I can clarify that, because if we're talking outside of your introduction that's required by your charter or the Larson Act, then no, you cannot do it from what your question is saying. Just to be clear, let me read her question again. If there is a first reading in meeting number 1 where no action is taken, and a second reading in meeting number 2 in which the vote takes place to levy the tax, can you hold the public hearing at the first meeting? Would that require additional advertising because no action or vote was taken at the meeting in which the public hearing was held? So if the first meeting number 1 is your introduction, which is how I'm reading this, then the answer is no, because you're advertising for your introduction. You The answer is no, because again, the court ruled that it's all one proposal. So anyway, if I'm not understanding your question, please reach out to me separately and we can go over that. Okay, so anyway, getting back to the slides. So the documents you're going to turn in to us, again, 2 resolutions, an affidavit, and a notary data sheet. And again, you will not turn in a certification to us because right now there's no declared disaster. The requirements for your resolution or ordinance. The first resolution or ordinance requires a simple majority vote of the members that are present. The first resolution or ordinance is going to designate the adjusted millage rate. That's going to designate that lower rate. So you might want to make a note of that. That first resolution or ordinance is going to designate the adjusted millage rate determined by reassessment. That's going to be the lower rate that will generate the same revenue as the prior year. And they can, if there's more than one, you can record them all on that same resolution or ordinance. The second resolution or ordinance requires 2/3 vote of the total membership. So again, 2/3 vote of the total membership must be voting in favor of that ordinance or resolution, and it does include vacant seats. It must set forth and designate the adjusted millage rate and the increase rate. So it's going to have the lower rate and the higher rate. All other millage rates that are not subject to the roll forward can be levied under the current year column, but they will not have an adjusted rate. Now, If you have taxes that are not included in your roll forward, you can even do a third resolution or ordinance to simplify it if you wanted to, just to keep them out of the roll forward documents. And we'll show you how that's done as well. On the next page of your setting millage rates book, both resolutions or ordinance shall be signed by an authorized person, just like before, signed by an authorized person, show the date of adoption, reflect the complete vote count. The requirements for your affidavit, again, it's a sworn statement by the legislative auditor. The affiant is attesting that the notice requirements are there. At your roll forward, there's a statement on the first page of the roll forward affidavit. It's a 2-page affidavit. On the first page of that, there's a statement that says roll forward occurred, yes or no. When you go to your public meeting and if it passes if your board votes by 2/3, if you get 2/3 vote, if they vote in favor of rolling forward, you're going to mark yes. So that tells us we need to keep going, check to be sure all the requirements were met. If your board does not want to roll forward and so it does not gain the 2/3 vote, you're going to mark no. So that tells us, well, we can stop checking for all those other requirements and just go ahead and levy the rate that's on resolution or the first resolution or ordinance, that lower rate. So you're going to mark no in that case. One thing I do want to say now is there is a new affidavit this year for 2026. So if you're going to roll forward this year, you will be required to use that new resolution. So go out to our website and obtain the current affidavit. The current affidavit for rolling forward off of the legislative auditor's website. Then moving on, the affiant, of course, is attesting that all of those requirements have been met. I can't remember if there's 15 or 16 requirements listed on page 2 of that affidavit. So if you are the affiant, you want to be sure that you are reading that affidavit and be sure that all of those requirements have been met. And then again, you're going to sign in front of the notary, and the notary is going to, put their name and their notary ID number on there. And you want to be sure that your notary is in good standing with the Secretary of State's office. So on the next slide, again, I'm not sure that these are in your book, but these are some issues that we found with the 2025 roll forward. To the top left, it says items 12 and 13. Now, we just talked about the press releases. You have to issue those to newspapers and to area broadcast media. You can see that they issued a press release to substantial newspapers with substantial distribution on June 9th, but they did not issue it to broadcast media. NA means not applicable. Well, it is applicable. It's applicable to everybody. So we could not certify that roll forward. So they could only levy the adjusted millage rate for their roll forward. The same thing right below that for items 11 and 12. They issued a press release to newspapers on June the 11th, but again, they did not issue it to broadcast media. They also put not applicable, so we cannot certify that roll forward either. Again, we use the first resolution to levy that adjusted millage rate. Toward the bottom, items 1, 2, 12, and 13 to the left, those in that bracket all came from the same affidavit. Now these cause red flags. There are things in the roll forward process, especially when we're checking them in the same parish and stuff. So, you see things whenever you check them. So you want to be careful that you're meeting all their requirements. And when we call you asking you for additional information, you're able to provide that for us. So item number 1 says, the public notice of date, time, place, and subject matter was published on 2 separate days in the Watchman, first on June 4th and the second time on June the 11th. And item 2 says, and in a paper with the larger circulation on May 27th and May 29th. Well, item number 12 and 13 pertain to the press release, which we just learned is a completely separate requirement. Items 1 and 2 pertain to the 2x4 advertisements, and items 12 and 13 pertain to the press release. Well, according to this, they issued their press release on the same date as they ran their 2x4 advertisement in the Baton Rouge Advocate. Which, I mean, I guess that's possible. But then when we got to question, I said, send me a copy of your press release. I want to see what you ran as your press release. And they did not issue a press release. They got confused thinking that it was the same document. And so we were not able to certify this roll forward either. When I questioned that, I said, I wanted to see what you sent as your press release. And they clarified that they were confused and didn't do it. Same thing to the right, item 1 and item 12 and 13. Now they're telling me that they did not have an official, they didn't have a paper with a larger circulation. So there was no item 2. But you can see they issued their 2x4 ad to the Catahoula News Booster on June 25th and July the 2nd. And they told me they on the affidavit, they issued their press release on June the 25th. Well, again, I called and let me see what you issued as your press release. And again, they did not issue a press release. They weren't able to send me any documentation. And they told me that they were confused on that as well. So we weren't able to certify their roll forward. So on both of those, we just used that first resolution and levied their adjusted millage rate. Now they do have the opportunity to roll forward this year in 26 to go ahead and roll forward. This is some more issues that we found. Items 10 and 11, 12 and 13. You can see in item 10, it says publications were published in sections, public notices, which are considered prominent sections of the newspapers and are not the classified advertisements or the public notice section. Well, we just learned that the public notice sections are prohibited. They have to be published. The 2x4 advertisements have to be published in prominent sections. And it goes on to say cannot be published in the classifieds or the public notices. So just be careful. And then you can see items 12 and 13 are blank. They did not issue the press release at all. So we could not we could not certify that roll forward at all either. So then on the next one, items 1 and 2, it says that they published in the Watchman and in the Advocate on April the 9th and April 16th. Well, their public hearing was held on May 13th, and there is not 30 days between April 16th and May 13th. So we could not certify their roll forward. So you want to be sure that you're counting these days too, because it's the last publication date and your public hearing. So this is a violation of the open meetings law. They published on June 8th, which was, they posted on June 8th, which was a Sunday, and June 9th was the Monday. And so remember, the open meetings law excludes weekends and legal holidays when posting your notice of public meeting. So they did not follow the open meetings law. So they had to hold another public meeting in accordance with the open meetings law. So this is an excerpt of one of the legislative auditor's affidavits. Remember, non-elected boards have to record video or broadcast live all of their public meetings. This district, and there is verbiage on the affidavit to attest that that was done. This taxing district removed that verbiage from the affidavit, and so they had to meet again and attest that that was done. So don't remove any of the language, especially if you're a non-elected board, from the legislative auditor's affidavit. So this is from the same taxing district as well. They were trying to roll forward. I think they were trying to roll forward, but they had several issues on this notice of public meeting and the affidavit. So on this notice of public meeting, to the left, you can see the notice of public meeting. There is no notice of public hearing to begin with. There's nothing on there that even publishes, because remember, revised statute 47-1705B says the public hearing will be held in accordance with the open meetings law. Well, there's nothing on here. There is no agenda, no notice of public hearing at all. And then down under new business, nothing on here under the agenda talks about a public hearing or the roll forward. So anyone reading that agenda would not have known a roll forward was taking place. And then to the right in the block, this is on the affidavit. They did not issue a press release to the broadcast media. So they had several issues with their roll forward that we could not certify. So this is an example of a roll forward. This is an example that was done correctly. This is a general alimony tax. Now it was done correctly. A general alimony tax is just a general purposes tax for a parish government. I don't know why it's called a general alimony tax. It's an operations tax that just goes in their general fund. So there was an increase in property value. In 2023, they levied 3.52 mills. There was an increase in property value. The assessor entered the 2023 value and the 2024 value. So you can see it went from 743 million to 820 million. So the 3.52 mills went lower to 3.19 mills to get the same revenue. So they could either levy that middle box, 3.19 mills, the adjusted maximum to get the same revenue, or they could roll back up to the prior year's maximum to get the 3.52 mills. And since it's an increase in value, it would now generate higher revenue. This is a screenshot of the database, and you can see this is West Baton Rouge Parish Council, and they did roll forward back up to the 3.52 mills. This is a copy of their 2x4 publication. They published twice in their official journal. They did not have a paper with a larger circulation. The Advocate is their larger circulation. They published on May 8th and May 15th for a public meeting held on July the 14th, I believe. So they gave plenty enough time. They gave more than 30 days. This is their actual 2x4 publication. I just had them send me the actual copy so it could be large enough for you to see what it actually looked like. Their meeting was on July 24th, excuse me. There's no example of a press release. However, just keep in mind it is a separate requirement from the 2x4 ad, and it must be done separately. Okay, there's no timeline, usually done 2 or 3 weeks beforehand, but just that's the one thing, as you saw in all those issues, that caused the most problems was that press release. It must be done separately from the 2x4 ads. That press release must be done separately. This is a copy of their notices. They had a notice of public hearing as item 1. A notice of public hearing will be held on July the 24th at 5:30. They gave an agenda item for their notice of public hearing to consider levying additional increased millage rates without further voter approval. And they closed that public hearing and adjourned it. So it's clear where they opened the public hearing and they adjourned their public hearing. Then item 2 is they opened their public meeting, gave date, time, and place of their public meeting. Now, typically, it would have been better to start their public meeting, say, I don't know, 5:45 or 6 o'clock, or even say 5:30 or immediately following the public hearing. That's not something we're going to send it back for, but anybody that's there at 5:30 for the public hearing knows to stay later for the public meeting. So this is their notice of public hearing and public meeting. They just started their public meeting immediately following the public hearing. This is where they gave notice of the roll forward under item 13B and C. Resolution adopting the adjusted millage rate is B, and under C, resolution adopting the adjusted millage rate after reassessment and rolling forward to a rate not exceeding the prior year. So that anybody reading this, you have to have two agenda items. You have to have two agenda items, one to adopt the adjusted rate and one to adopt the roll forward. But anybody reading this knows the roll forward is going to occur. And then the West Baton Rouge Parish Council, they have more than that one millage rate. So then they had a third agenda item to adopt all of their other taxes. And that's why they have D, resolution to adopt 2025 tax year millages. And then this is where they adjourned. So they did submit their full agenda. This is the roll forward affidavit, and keep in mind it is new this year. Under the roll forward code statement, you can see items number 1 and 2. The advocate is their official journal. Item 2 they left blank because there is no paper with a larger circulation. Items 12 and 13 is where they issued their press release on May 29th. And this is where we sent that back to the assessor as their package was approved. The check marks, the green check marks mean that we checked each one of those documents individually and they checked out fine. And so we sent it back to the assessor as that package was accepted. Now this is a copy of the new affidavit. The thing that changed that we tried to make it clearer is items 12 and 13. We put that little asterisk there explaining that the press release is a separate requirement and should be done in addition to that 2x4 ad, hoping to provide some clarity that and draw that to people's attention that you need to do that separate from that 2x4 ad. One thing I wanted to remind you of is just keep in mind that, like we said in the beginning, the definitions, that if you do not roll forward that prior year's maximum, that maximum authorized levy will be lost if you don't roll forward prior to the next reassessment. So you still have 26 and 27 to roll forward if you haven't done so. But one thing I want to point out, it's not required that you roll forward. That's not why we're not here advocating for that. That's strictly a decision that each taxing district needs to make on their own regarding for your budgetary needs. This is a taxing district I wanted to show you. They have not rolled forward since 2020, and that is fine. That is strictly their decision to make. So I just wanted to point that out to you. This is they have 3 meals, voter approved 3 meals. Again, it's their decision to make. It's not required. Just look at your budgetary needs and then you can decide if you need to roll forward. And then this is just an example of the codes that each assessor receives on the millage documents. I wanted to point this out because it's not always going to be package accepted for just various reasons. We go back and forth through that secured database. This is the West Feliciana Parish Assessment District. The assessor, the first time, he recalled all of the documents because he submitted the wrong, I think he might have submitted the school board's documents under the assessment district. And then you see a decline there because he submitted an out-of-date affidavit. Maybe I forget exactly what they were. And then finally we accepted his millage documents for his own taxing district. So they're fine. It wasn't anything major, but there are other codes that are sent back and forth to the assessor. It's a very interactive database that we have. And then this is a multi-parish taxing district. I wanted to show you this in case you are a multi-parish taxing district and explain to you, other taxing districts may get their millage rates and their property values back pretty quick, whereas if you're a multi-parish taxing district, yours are going to take a little longer This is Red River Waterway, and you can see they have 7 different parishes that they report to. So we can't approve their reassessment until we get values from every one of these parishes, because it's one tax. It's not 6 or 7 different taxes. It's one tax that covers property in all of these parishes. And so it's going to be recorded as one tax. It's going to be adjusted as one tax, but it's just values being pulled from 6 or 7 different parishes to make that one adjustment. So you won't get your reassessment back until all of those parishes have submitted values. And then the different types of ad valorem taxes. If you've been in your position for any amount of time, or if you've participated in the workshops, you're familiar with these. But if not, I'll just go over these pretty quickly. The different types of ad valorem taxes are constitutional, statutory, and voter approved, and they're pretty self-explanatory. A constitutional tax is approved, it's after the voters have approved it. They go through the state constitution, and they usually go before the voters. The statutory taxes go through the legislature, but they typically have some other kind of provision that go with them. Like the legislature says, yes, you can levy this millage rate, but only after you seek voter approval, or only after you go into a cooperative endeavor agreement, or something like that. And then of course a voter approved tax is just that it goes through a voter approved tax. So that's the different types of tax. Now I want to step back to a constitutional tax. There's several. A constitutional tax, like I said, or it's just that it's constitutional. That general alimony tax that the West Baton Rouge was levying, it's a continual tax, and it started out as being 7 meals, but that doesn't mean it's 7 meals now. Those taxes are adjusted through reassessment, just like any other tax would be adjusted through reassessment. So it may be at 5 meals now because they didn't roll forward, or it may be at 9 meals now because there was a decrease in property value. So those taxes go through reassessment just like every other tax does too. So then we're going to go on to the maximum millage reports. These are just informational reports. Now these reports, again, let me emphasize, they're just informational reports. They're not audited reports or anything. So if you see something on there that doesn't look right, you need to let us know. But they are available on our website now for each parish in the state. And they are just reports that we put out there pertaining to each one of your ad valorem taxes that provide information regarding like what they were originally, the election date, what reassessment did them, how they were adjusted. So the reports are out there now if you wanted to go look at it. And this is what they look like. This is one for Iberville Parish. Again, there's one out there for every parish. So this is Iberville. The first column is just the millage key. The second column is a description. The first column is a purpose, and there's a legend on our website that describes what those purpose codes mean. There's a type column. And one thing I want to point out here, because this is different from the database that we talked about earlier, this authorized rate column, that's what it was originally. That's not what it is now. It's what it was originally. What it is now is all the way to the right, that levied column. To the very right is the levied column, is what it was levied at last year. So it's different from what it is when you look at the screenshots in our database. So if you want to know what it is right now, it's that very last column is the levied column. And this is just the second page of Iberville Parish's maximum millage report. And this is a screenshot of a general obligation bond. Again, there should be some fluctuation in your general obligation bond. So this is Vernon Parish School Board. You can see where they have had some fluctuation. Sometimes it would go down, sometimes it would go up, depending on property values. Property values do not stay the same. Now, maybe 2 or 3 years in a row they would stay the same, but we know at reassessment your values are going to change. So we should see either upward or downward in your millage rate, some type of fluctuation to know that you are recalculating those bond millage rates based off of your repayment schedule. And so that concludes the millage rate. This is just access to information that's available on our website. The Legislative Auditor's website has a slew of information, and this is just information that's available under my page, the Assessors and Millages website. There's FAQs out there. The pension fund reports are out there. Those sample forms are out there. That required affidavit, you do have to use our affidavit, is out there. That tells you how to get there. Our legal assistance pages are out there. Like I told you, it has great information. FAQs are wonderful. A lot of people go out there for their public records and public bids questions. They're wonderful. And then this is my contact information. Feel free to reach out to me, email me some questions. If I wasn't able to answer them today, feel free to reach out. And again, if you need confirmation for attendance today, of course, you can always reach out for me to provide that to you as well. I appreciate you all attending today. I hope I provided some clarity on that roll forward to you. And I know that Patrick was able to clear up the open meetings law for you a little bit. Feel free to reach out. And we do have 3 in-person workshops coming up. If you are close to one of those and feel like attending one of those in person, you're more than welcome. So again, thank you, and reach out if you need some assistance. Thank you again.